The howling wind carried dust across the desolate street of Redemption Creek as Adam Stone rode in, his weathered face bearing the scars of a man who had seen too much and said too little. It was 1878, and the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona Territory had been his only companion for longer than he cared to remember. His boots were worn, his coat threadbare, but his eyes remained sharp as eagle talons as they scanned the ramshackle buildings of the small frontier town. Night was falling fast, bringing with it the bitter cold that only the desert could deliver. Adam dismounted his faithful Palomino, patting the horse's neck before tying him to a post outside the general store. He needed supplies before heading back to his small ranch outside of town, a lonely patch of land that was more sanctuary than home. "Just a few minutes, Thunder," he murmured to the horse. "Then we'll head back." The town was quiet this evening, most folks having retreated to their homes or the saloon to escape the approaching chill. Adam adjusted his hat, pulling it lower over his eyes as he moved toward the store. It was then that he heard a faint rustling from the narrow alley between the general store and the barber shop. His hand instinctively moved to the holster at his hip. Years of surviving in the territory had taught him to be cautious. The rustling continued, followed by what sounded like a muffled cough. Adam paused, then silently moved toward the sound, his footsteps barely audible on the hard, packed dirt. What he saw stopped him cold. A young woman, thin as a rail and dressed in tattered clothes, was frantically digging through a pile of discarded crates and barrels behind the store. Her movements were desperate, her hands trembling as she searched through what was clearly trash, occasionally stuffing something into a small cloth sack. Adam watched, transfixed. She hadn't noticed him yet, and he observed how she paused occasionally to glance nervously over her shoulder, like a wounded animal expecting a predator. Her long hair, which might have been beautiful if clean, hung in dirty strands around a face that, despite its grime, showed signs of delicate beauty. "Miss," he finally said, keeping his voice low and gentle as he would when approaching a skittish horse. The woman spun around, her eyes wide with terror. In the fading light, Adam could see they were an unusual shade of green, bright against her dirt-smudged face. She clutched her small bag to her chest and backed against the wall. "I ain't done nothing wrong," she said, her voice hoarse but defiant. "This is just trash they're throwing away." Adam raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I didn't say you did, miss." He took in her appearance more carefully now, the way her collarbone protruded from her threadbare dress, the bruises on her arms, the trembling that seemed to course through her entire body. "Are you hungry?" She didn't answer, but her eyes darted to the general store and back to him, suspicion clear in her gaze. "My name's Adam." "Adam Stone," he said, slowly lowering his hands. "I have some food at my ranch, not much, but it's warm and there's plenty to share." "I don't go with strange men," she replied, her chin lifting slightly in a show of pride that touched something long dormant in Adam's heart. "That's wise," he nodded, "but it's getting cold and you look like you could use a meal." He gestured to the trash heap. "Better than whatever you might find there." She swayed slightly, and Adam realized she was weaker than she was letting on. Just as the thought crossed his mind, her knees buckled. He moved forward with the quick reflexes that had saved his life more than once, catching her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, alarmingly so. Up close, he could see that she was young, probably no more than 20 or 21. Despite the dirt and grime, there was a refined quality to her features that suggested she hadn't always lived like this. "Please," she whispered, struggling weakly in his arms. "I can walk." "You're about to faint from hunger, miss," Adam said matter-of-factly. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Just want to help." She studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for something. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she stopped struggling, though her body remained tense. "What's your name?" Adam asked gently, still cradling her in his arms. "Violet," she answered after a hesitation. "Violet Hayes." "Well, Miss Hayes," Adam said, making a decision, "I think you need food, rest, and maybe a doctor. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I'm going to put you on my horse if that's all right. fear flashed in her eyes again. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking for payment," he replied, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "Just trying to help someone who needs it." After a moment's consideration, she gave a small nod. Adam carried her to where Thunder waited patiently, the horse's ears perking up at their approach. With careful movements, he lifted Violet onto the saddle, noting how she winced in pain as she settled. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just hungry," she replied, though Adam suspected there was more to it than that. He untied Thunder and led the horse away from the post, then swung up behind Violet. She stiffened as his arms reached around her to take the reins, but made no protest. Adam could feel her trembling against him, whether from fear or cold or both, he couldn't tell. "It's a bit of a ride," he warned her, but Thunder's sure-footed, even in the dark. They set off down the main street, attracting a few curious glances from the few townsfolk still out and about. Adam ignored them, focusing instead on the fragile woman in front of him. She smelled of dirt and desperation, but underneath was something else, a faint floral scent that reminded him of better days. As they left the town behind, the desert opened up before them, vast and silent under a canopy of stars. Adam felt Violet gradually relax against him as exhaustion overtook her wariness. By the time the lights of Redemption Creek had faded completely, her head was resting against his chest, her breathing deep and even. Adam rode on through the darkness, guided by stars and memory, acutely aware of the trust this stranger had placed in him. It had been years since anyone had depended on him for anything, years since he'd felt the weight of responsibility for another human being. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, but he knew the answer. For the first time in a long while, he was doing what felt right. His ranch came into view just as the moon reached its zenith, a small cabin with a stable beside it, nestled against a backdrop of rocky hills. It wasn't much, but it was his, built with his own hands after he'd left his old life behind. As Thunder carried them into the yard, a dog's bark broke the silence. "That's just Ranger," Adam told the half-asleep woman in his arms. "He's loud but friendly." Violet stirred, blinking in confusion at their surroundings. "Where?" "My ranch," Adam replied, dismounting carefully before reaching up to help her down. "Home." The word felt strange on his lips. It had been a long time since this place had felt like more than just shelter. As Violet's feet touched the ground, her legs gave way again. Without hesitation, Adam scooped her into his arms once more. She was too weak to protest now, her head lolling against his shoulder as he carried her toward the cabin door. Ranger, a large brown mutt of indeterminate breed, circled them excitedly, his tail wagging in welcome. "Later, boy," Adam told the dog as he pushed the door open with his boot. The cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the embers still glowing faintly from the morning's fire. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center, while a narrow bed occupied the far corner. Shelves lined with books, unusual for a frontier home, covered another wall. Adam gently laid Violet on the bed, concerned by how pale she looked in the dim light. He quickly rekindled the fire, adding logs until flames danced cheerfully, casting warm light throughout the small space. "Let me get you some water," he said, moving to a bucket near the door. He filled a tin cup and brought it to her, supporting her head as she drank greedily. "Slow down," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." She nodded weakly, allowing him to take the cup away after a few more sips. Her eyes, clearer now, took in her surroundings with wary curiosity. "I need to see to Thunder," Adam explained, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "There's more water here if you need it. I'll be back soon to make some food." Outside, Adam took longer than necessary to unsaddle and brush down his horse, giving himself time to think. It had been years since he'd had a guest in his home, let alone a woman. The last female to cross his threshold had been. But no, he wouldn't think about that now. By the time he returned to the cabin, carrying a few eggs and some salt pork from the small storehouse, Violet had managed to sit up in the bed, though she still looked terribly weak. "I'm sorry to be a burden," she said immediately, her voice slightly stronger after the water. "You're not," Adam replied simply, setting down his provisions. Hungry, she nodded, watching as he efficiently set about preparing a simple meal. He wasn't much of a cook, but he knew how to fry up pork and eggs. As the food sizzled in the pan, filling the cabin with its savory aroma, he felt Violet's eyes on his back. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Adam turned, considering his answer carefully. "Because you needed it," he said at last, "and because I know what it's like to have no one to turn to." Something in her expression softened at his words, a flash of recognition perhaps, but it was quickly replaced by caution again. "I'll be gone by morning," she promised. "Once I've rested." Adam didn't argue, simply turned back to the cooking food. When it was ready, he brought a plate to her, along with a fork that was slightly bent from years of use. "Eat slowly," he advised again. "Your stomach needs to remember how to handle food." She nodded, taking the plate with hands that still trembled slightly. Adam sat at the table with his own plate, giving her space. He watched from the corner of his eye as she forced herself to take small bites, though he could tell she wanted to devour everything at once. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional contented sigh from Ranger, who had settled by the hearth. "This is good," Violet finally said, her voice soft. "Thank you." Adam nodded, unused to conversation. "There's more if you want it." She shook her head. "This is plenty." She set the half-empty plate on her lap, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. "You should rest," Adam said, standing to take her plate. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, and he was struck by how delicate her hands were despite the dirt and calluses. "I can sleep on the floor," she offered, looking around the one-room cabin. "You'll take the bed," Adam replied firmly. "I've slept on harder ground than my own floor plenty of times." Too tired to argue, Violet nodded. Adam fetched an extra blanket from a trunk and laid it by the fire for himself, then pulled a clean shirt from the same trunk. "It's not much," he said, offering it to her, "but it's dry and clean. You can change while I'm outside." She accepted the shirt with a grateful nod. Adam stepped outside, giving her privacy. The night air was cold now, the stars brilliant in the clear sky above. He took a deep breath, wondering what had possessed him to bring a stranger into his home, into the solitude he had cultivated for so long. When he judged enough time had passed, he knocked softly on his own door. "You can come in," Violet called. She was already under the covers, his shirt enormous on her slight frame. Her clothes were folded neatly on the floor beside the bed. In the firelight, with some of the dirt wiped from her face, Adam could see more clearly how beautiful she was. Her features were delicate, her green eyes large in her thin face, her lips curved in a gentle shape that suggested she had once smiled easily. "Thank you again," she said, her voice thick with approaching sleep. "For everything." Adam nodded, settling onto his makeshift bed by the fire. Ranger came to lie beside him, a warm, comforting presence. "Get some rest," he told her. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Violet's eyes were already closing, her breathing becoming deep and even. Adam watched the firelight play across her face for a while before finally closing his own eyes, lulled by the unfamiliar but somehow comforting sound of another person's breathing in his home. Morning came with the insistent crowing of the rooster Adam kept with his small flock of chickens. He woke instantly, as was his habit, momentarily confused by the sight of someone in his bed. Then the events of the previous night came back to him, and he sat up quietly, careful not to wake Violet. She was still deeply asleep, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been the night before. In the clear morning light streaming through the cabin's small windows, Adam could see more details he had missed. There was a fading bruise on her cheekbone, partially hidden by her hair and what looked like older scars on her arms. Anger stirred in his chest at the thought of someone hurting her, surprising him with its intensity. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on practical matters. She would need food when she woke and perhaps a chance to wash up. Moving silently, he slipped outside to begin his morning chores. He fed the chickens, collected eggs, and drew fresh water from the well. After some consideration, he heated enough for a bath, using the large tin tub he normally only brought out once a week. She would appreciate the chance to get clean, he thought. When he returned to the cabin with the last bucket of hot water, Violet was awake, sitting up in bed with her knees drawn to her chest. She looked startled, as if she'd forgotten where she was, but relaxed slightly when she recognized him. "Good morning," Adam said, setting down the bucket. "Thought you might like to wash up. Water's hot." Surprise and then profound gratitude crossed her face. "A bath? You didn't have to go to all that trouble." "No trouble," he replied with a shrug. "I'll be outside seeing to the animals. Take your time." He left her again, busying himself with tasks that didn't really need doing, giving her privacy. The morning was clear and cool, promising another scorching day as the sun climbed higher. Adam found himself wondering about Violet's story, where she had come from, what had driven her to digging through trash in a backwater town, who had left those marks on her skin. It wasn't his business, he reminded himself. She would be gone soon, as she had promised, and his life would return to its quiet solitude. The thought brought less comfort than it once would have. When Violet finally emerged from the cabin, Adam was momentarily stunned. She had washed her hair, which now fell in damp, dark auburn waves past her shoulders. Her face, clean of dirt, revealed a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and high cheekbones. She was wearing her old dress, which looked even more tattered against her clean skin, but she carried herself with a dignity that transcended her shabby clothing. "I hung your shirt to dry," she said, gesturing back toward the cabin. "Thank you for the bath." "I can't remember the last time I felt so clean." Adam nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. There was a vitality to her now that hadn't been there before, a spark that the hunger and exhaustion had dimmed but not extinguished. "Are you hungry?" he finally managed to ask. "Yes," she admitted with a small smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, almost carefree for a moment. "But I don't want to impose further." "I've got eggs," Adam said, already turning toward the cabin, "and bread from town that's only a day old." They ate breakfast at the small table, Violet seemingly more at ease than she had been the night before. Adam found himself watching her hands as she ate, graceful despite their roughness, with long fingers that suggested she might once have played piano or painted. "You said you'd be leaving today," he said when they had finished eating, immediately regretting his abruptness when he saw her face fall. "Yes, of course," she said quickly, standing to gather their plates. "I've imposed enough." "That's not what I meant," Adam said, frustrated with his lack of social graces. "I just wondered where you were planning to go." Violet hesitated, her hands stilling on the dishes. "I don't know," she admitted after a moment. "I was heading west, I think, California, maybe." "I heard there are opportunities there for women on their own." Adam nodded, considering. "It's a long way, dangerous for someone traveling alone, especially without supplies or a horse." "I'm tougher than I look," she said, lifting her chin in that proud way he had noticed before. "I don't doubt it," Adam replied honestly, "but even the toughest folks need help sometimes." He surprised himself with the next words out of his mouth. "You could stay here a while, until you're stronger at least. Got an extra horse you could use when you're ready to move on." Violet stared at him, clearly shocked by the offer. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Adam shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Ranch needs work, could use an extra pair of hands." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was easier than explaining feelings he didn't fully understand himself. "I don't know much about ranch work," Violet admitted. "You can learn," Adam replied. "If you want to." She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as if looking for some hidden motive. Adam met her gaze steadily, having nothing to hide. "All right," she finally said. "Until I'm stronger, then I'll move on and pay you back for the horse somehow." Adam nodded, oddly relieved by her agreement. "Good," he said simply, and that was that. The first few days established a cautious routine. Adam showed Violet the basic chores: feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, tending the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. She learned quickly, approaching each task with determination despite her still recovering strength. They spoke little at first, both seemingly more comfortable with silence than conversation. Adam would go about his work mending fences, checking on his small herd of cattle, hunting when necessary, and returned to find Violet had swept the cabin or prepared a simple meal from whatever provisions were available. At night, despite Violet's protests, Adam continued to sleep on his bedroll by the fire, giving her the bed. Sometimes, in the quiet darkness, he would hear her crying softly, but he never mentioned it, sensing she valued her privacy as much as he valued his own. It was on the 5th day that things began to change. Adam returned from checking the northern fence line to find Violet outside the cabin, a look of accomplishment on her face. "I made bread," she announced as he dismounted. "Found flour in the pantry and remembered how my mother used to do it." Adam followed her inside to find a golden brown loaf cooling on the table. The cabin smelled wonderful, like a real home, and something tightened in his chest at the thought. "Been a long time since I had fresh bread," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Try it," Violet urged, a hint of nervousness behind her smile. Adam cut a slice, still warm, and took a bite. It was good, better than good. The crust was crisp, the inside soft and flavorful. He closed his eyes briefly, savoring it. "This is excellent," he said when he had swallowed. "Your mother taught you well." A shadow passed over Violet's face at the mention of her mother, but she smiled again quickly. "She was a wonderful cook, said a woman's worth wasn't measured by fancy things but by how well she could make something from nothing." She paused, looking down at her hands. "She died when I was 16. Fever took her in just 3 days." It was the first personal information she had volunteered, and Adam recognized it for the gesture of trust it was. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "Lost my own mother young too, didn't have time to learn much from her." Violet nodded in understanding. "What about your father? Died in the war," Adam replied, surprising himself again with his willingness to share. "Confederate side. I was already out west by then, so I didn't hear until months later." "The war tore apart so many families," Violet said softly. They ate the bread with some stew Violet had also prepared, talking more freely than they had before. Adam found himself telling her about how he had come west at 18, seeking adventure and finding hardship instead. He told her about working cattle drives, about learning to survive in the unforgiving landscape, about finally saving enough to buy this small ranch 3 years ago. In return, Violet shared fragments of her own past growing up in Missouri, her mother's death, living with an aunt afterward. But Adam noticed she said nothing about more recent years, nothing about how she had ended up alone and starving in Redemption Creek. As the days passed, Violet grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill out and color returned to her previously pale complexion. She worked alongside Adam, learning to ride the gentle mare he kept as a backup mount, helping with increasingly complex ranch tasks. Sometimes, Adam would catch her looking at him when she thought he wouldn't notice, a puzzled expression on her face, as if she were trying to solve a particularly complex riddle. Other times, he would find himself watching her as she hung laundry or tended the garden, admiring the graceful way she moved, the determined set of her jaw when she tackled a difficult task. It was during the 2nd week that Adam finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Those bruises," he said one evening as they sat by the fire after supper, "and the scars on your arms, someone hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway, her voice quiet but steady. "My husband," she said, staring into the flames. "Ex-husband now, I suppose, though there was never any formal divorce." Adam's hands clenched involuntarily. "He the reason you were running?" Violet nodded, still not looking at him. "Victor Blackwood. He seemed so charming when we met. My aunt was thrilled he was wealthy, respected in town. I was 19, naive, thought I was in love." She gave a bitter laugh. "The beatings started 3 days after the wedding. At first he was careful, nothing visible, nothing that couldn't be hidden beneath clothing, but it got worse." Adam remained silent, giving her space to continue if she chose to. "He was careful in public, always the doting husband. No one would have believed me if I'd told them the truth. Then he lost heavily at cards one night and came home drunk. Beat me so badly I couldn't get out of bed for 2 days." Her hand went unconsciously to her ribs as if the pain still lingered. "That's when I knew he would kill me eventually, so I ran." "How long ago?" Adam asked, his voice rough with suppressed anger. 6 months, Violet replied. I've been moving west, staying nowhere too long, taking work where I could find it. But in the last town, someone recognized me, said Victor had posted a reward for information about my whereabouts. I panicked, left without the few belongings I'd managed to accumulate. Hadn't eaten in 2 days when you found me. Adam digested this information, various emotions warring within him: anger at the man who had hurt her, admiration for her courage in escaping, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. He won't find you here, he said finally, the promise evident in his tone. Violet looked at him then, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. You don't know him, Adam. He's persistent and he has resources. It's not just about finding me, it's about his pride. He can't let people think a woman left him. I know men like that, Adam replied grimly, but this is my land and you're under my protection now. If he comes here, he'll regret it. The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Violet looked away first, but not before Adam saw something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. After that night, something shifted between them. They began to talk more freely, sharing stories from their pasts, discovering common interests. Adam learned that Violet loved books as much as he did, and they spent evenings reading aloud from his small collection. She had a beautiful voice, expressive and clear, bringing the words to life in a way that made Adam see the stories anew. In turn, he taught her more about ranch life, how to predict weather changes from the behavior of animals, how to track game through the desert, how to shoot the old rifle he kept for protection against predators. She was a quick study, approaching each lesson with an enthusiasm that was infectious. 3 weeks after her arrival, Adam returned from town with supplies and a surprise: a simple but pretty dress he had purchased from the general store. Figured you might be tired of wearing the same thing every day, he said gruffly, holding out the package. Woman at the store helped me pick it out, said it should fit someone of your build. He felt his ears growing hot at the admission that he had discussed her with someone else, but Violet didn't seem to notice. She took the package with wide eyes, carefully unwrapping the brown paper to reveal a dress of soft blue cotton. It was nothing fancy, practical enough for ranch work, with buttons down the front and a simple collar, but it was new and clean and her very own. Adam, she breathed, running her fingers over the fabric. It's beautiful, but you shouldn't have spent your money on me. Wanted to, he replied simply. Ranch is doing well enough, and you've earned it with all the work you've put in. Her eyes, when she looked up at him, were shining with unshed tears. Thank you, she said, and then, in a gesture that caught him completely off guard, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Adam froze, the sensation of her lips against his skin sending a jolt through his entire body. By the time he had recovered, Violet had already retreated, clutching the dress to her chest. I'll try it on, she said, a blush coloring her cheeks as she disappeared into the cabin. Left alone outside, Adam touched the spot where she had kissed him, a confusing mix of emotions swirling through him. It had been so long since he had felt anything like this warmth, this increasingly insistent awareness of another person. It both thrilled and terrified him. When Violet emerged in the new dress, Adam's breath caught in his throat. The blue fabric brought out the green of her eyes, and the cut of the dress revealed that she had regained much of the weight she had lost during her ordeal. She was beautiful not in the showy way of saloon girls or the prim manner of town ladies, but in a natural, vital way that seemed to belong here on this land in this life. Does it look all right? She asked, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Yes, Adam managed to say. It suits you. She smiled then, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face and sent Adam's heart racing. In that moment, he knew he was falling in love with Violet Hayes, and the realization was as frightening as it was exhilarating. The days began to take on a rhythm, a comfortable pattern that felt increasingly like a shared life rather than a temporary arrangement. They worked side by side during the day and talked by the fire in the evenings. Sometimes they would sit in companionable silence, Violet mending clothes while Adam whittled or read. Ranger, who had been wary of the newcomer at first, had become Violet's devoted admirer, following her around the ranch and sleeping at the foot of her bed at night. Even Thunder, Adam's usually standoffish palomino, would nicker softly when she approached, earning a look of amused betrayal from Adam. "All my animals are sweet on you," he commented one afternoon as they brushed down the horses together. Violet laughed, the sound clear and joyful in the quiet stable. "They just know I'm likely to slip them extra treats." "Is that your secret?" Adam asked, smiling. "Bribing them with food?" "Works with most males I've found," she teased, and then looked surprised at her own boldness. Adam chuckled, enjoying this playful side of her that emerged more frequently as she felt safer. "Well, can't argue with that. Good food is a powerful motivator. Speaking of which," Violet said, finishing with the mare's mane, "I was thinking of trying my hand at a pie tonight. Found some apples in town last time we were there, and they're still good." "Apple pie," Adam said, his interest evident. "Haven't had that since. Well, can't remember the last time." "Then it's settled," Violet declared, patting the mare's neck before heading for the stable door. "Apple pie for supper." Adam watched her go, struck again by how naturally she had fit herself into his life, how the ranch felt more like a home with her in it. The thought of her eventually leaving, as she had said she would, created a hollow feeling in his chest that he tried to ignore. That evening, as they ate the pie, which was indeed delicious, Adam found himself watching Violet more intently than usual. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the copper strands in her auburn hair, the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. "What?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Do I have crumbs on my face?" "No," Adam replied honestly. "Just thinking how different things are since you've been here." Violet set down her fork, her expression growing serious. "Different good or different bad?" "Good," Adam said without hesitation. "Definitely good." She looked down at her plate, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "For me too," she admitted softly. "I never expected to feel safe again, or happy." The word hung between them, significant in its simplicity. Happy. It had been so long since either of them had used that word to describe their lives. "Violet," Adam began, then hesitated, unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing stronger each day. "I know you said you were planning to move on once you were stronger, and you are now stronger, I mean, but I was hoping, that is, I wanted to ask if you might consider staying here with me." He stumbled over the words, cursing his lack of eloquence. Violet looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Adam," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Adam took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I'm asking if you might want to make this arrangement permanent. I know it's not much, just a small ranch, a simple life, but it could be ours, together." Violet's eyes filled with tears, and for a terrible moment, Adam thought he had misread everything, that she was about to refuse him gently but firmly. "I think I've been falling in love with you," she said instead, the words rushing out as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. "But I was afraid to hope you might feel the same." Relief and joy surged through Adam with such force that he nearly knocked over his chair as he stood and moved around the table to kneel beside her. "I do," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "Feel the same, that is." "More than I thought possible." Violet's smile was luminous through her tears. "Then yes, I'll stay." Adam raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through him. When he looked up again, Violet was watching him with such tenderness that it took his breath away. "May I kiss you?" he asked, suddenly shy despite the intensity of his feelings. In answer, Violet leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing gave way to newfound hope. Adam's hands moved to cradle her face, while hers found their way to his shoulders, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers, savoring the moment of perfect connection. "I never thought I'd find this," he confessed quietly. "Never thought I deserved it after everything that happened before." Violet pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. Before, Adam sighed, knowing it was time to share the part of his past he had kept hidden even from her. Before I came here, the reason I live alone so far from town. He stood, needing space for this confession, and moved to the fireplace. Violet remained seated, waiting patiently for him to continue. I was a lawman once, he finally said, staring into the flames. Deputy sheriff in a town up in Colorado Territory, had a wife, Anna, and a daughter, Elizabeth. The names felt strange on his tongue after so long. They were everything to me. He paused, the memories washing over him with painful clarity. There was a gang operating in the area, rustlers mostly, but they weren't above robbery and worse if the opportunity presented itself. Sheriff and I had been tracking them for months, getting close. Then one day, while I was out following a lead, they came to town. Adam's hands clenched at his sides, the old grief rising like a physical pain in his chest. They robbed the bank. Anna was there with Elizabeth, making a deposit of money we'd been saving. When things went wrong, they took hostages, my wife and daughter among them. Violet made a soft sound of distress but didn't interrupt. By the time I got back, it was over. They'd killed the hostages to cover their escape, all of them. Anna, Elizabeth, she was only 6 years old. His voice broke on the last words, the wound still raw despite the passage of years. He felt Violet's presence before he saw her, rising to stand beside him, her hand gently taking his. I hunted them down, Adam continued, his voice hardening. Every last one of them took me 2 years. When it was done, I couldn't go back to being a lawman, couldn't stay in that town with the memories, so I drifted working ranches until I had enough to buy this place. Been here ever since. Oh, Adam, Violet said, her voice thick with tears, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, though they both knew the pain was still present. Almost 9 years now, but it changed me, made me someone I didn't recognize for a long time. Violet squeezed his hand, offering comfort through touch when words seemed inadequate. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Adam turned to face her fully. You deserved to know. Before you decided for certain about staying, I've been alone a long time, Violet, not sure I remember how to be anything else. You do, she assured him, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. You've shown me every day since you found me kindness, respect, care. Those aren't the actions of someone who's forgotten how to connect with others. Adam leaned into her touch, drawing strength from her certainty. I'm still afraid, he admitted, of losing you, of history repeating itself. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Violet said honestly, but I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what love is, isn't it? Not the absence of fear, but the courage to love anyway. Adam pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if to reassure himself of her solidity, her presence. She returned the embrace with equal fervor, her head tucked perfectly beneath his chin. Together then, he murmured into her hair, the word a promise and a prayer. They married a month later, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who visited Redemption Creek every 6 weeks. The entire town turned out, curious about the mysterious woman who had captured the heart of the reclusive rancher. Violet wore her blue dress, freshly pressed, with wildflowers in her hair that Adam had gathered that morning. He wore his one good shirt and a new pair of trousers, his usually unruly hair slicked back with water in a vain attempt at neatness. They spoke their vows under the shade of the old cottonwood tree in the town square, their voices clear and sure despite the audience. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Adam kissed Violet with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened townsfolk. The celebration afterward was modest, but joyful food contributed by neighbors, music provided by a fiddler from the saloon, dancing in the dusty street as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. As darkness fell, Adam and Violet slipped away, riding back to the ranch, their ranch now, truly shared between them. Ranger greeted them with enthusiastic barking as they dismounted, the dog seeming to sense the significance of the day. Adam lifted Violet into his arms to carry her across the threshold, an old tradition his mother had once told him about. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he pushed open the door with his foot. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stone," he said, setting her down gently in the middle of the cabin. "I like the sound of that," Violet replied, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Violet Stone." They stood for a moment, taking in the space that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely love story, the table where they had shared meals, the fireplace where they had talked through long evenings, the bed where Violet had first begun to heal. "It looks different somehow," Adam observed. "Like new eyes." "It's the same," Violet said, moving into his arms again, "just fuller now with two hearts instead of one." As Adam lowered his head to kiss her, he marveled at how this woman found digging through trash, carried home in his arms on an impulse he still didn't fully understand, had brought light back into his life. For the first time in nearly a decade, he felt complete, as if a missing piece had finally been restored. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in ways both tender and passionate, learning the language of touch and whispered endearments. Adam, who had thought himself incapable of such vulnerability again, found himself utterly undone by Violet's loving touch, by the trust she placed in him, by the future suddenly stretching before them, bright with possibility. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the simple quilt, Violet's head resting on his chest, Adam finally gave voice to the fear that still lingered beneath his happiness. "What if he comes looking for you?" he asked quietly. "Your husband, ex-husband." Violet was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I've thought about that," she admitted. "Part of me has been waiting for it, expecting it, but it's been over 7 months now, and I'm not the same woman who ran away. I'm stronger now. We're stronger together." Adam tightened his arm around her. "If he ever shows his face here, we'll handle it," Violet finished for him. "But Adam, I don't want to live in fear of him. I don't want him to have that power over us, over our happiness." Adam considered her words, recognizing the wisdom in them. "You're right," he said finally. "We can't let shadows from the past darken what we're building here." Violet raised herself up on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling around them like a curtain. "And we are building something beautiful, aren't we?" "We are," Adam agreed, reaching up to touch her face with a reverence that made her breath catch. "Something I never thought I'd have again." "A home," Violet said softly. "A real one built on love and respect and trust," Adam added, drawing her down for another kiss. "Always that." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding, the days filled with shared work and quiet contentment. They expanded the garden, added more chickens, and began planning improvements to the cabin. Adam taught Violet to shoot with deadly accuracy, a skill she hoped never to need but practiced diligently nonetheless. They rode into town together now when supplies were needed, no longer avoiding social interactions as Adam had done for so long. Slowly, they began to form friendships with some of the townsfolk, the blacksmith and his wife, the schoolteacher, even the gruff old doctor who had initially regarded their union with skepticism. 6 months into their marriage, as winter gave way to spring, Violet shared news that filled Adam with equal parts joy and terror. She was expecting a child. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely audible as they sat at the table after supper. Violet nodded, her hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. "The doctor confirmed it today when you were getting supplies. He says everything looks healthy so far." Adam's mind raced with memories of Elizabeth, of the daughter he had lost, of the risks of bringing a child into this harsh world. But alongside the fear was a surge of hope so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "A baby," he whispered, reaching across the table to cover Violet's hands with his own. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Violet asked, searching his face anxiously. "I know this might bring up difficult memories for you." Adam moved around the table and knelt beside her chair, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his head against her belly where their child grew. "I am happy," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "Scared too, but mostly happy. So happy, Violet." She stroked his hair, understanding without words the complex emotions he was experiencing. "We'll take each day as it comes," she promised. "Together." As the months passed and Violet's belly swelled with new life, Adam found himself torn between protectiveness and awe. He insisted on taking over the more strenuous chores, fretting when Violet overexerted herself, much to her amused exasperation. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him regularly, though she accepted his concern with good grace. They prepared the cabin for the new arrival, Adam building a cradle from wood he had been saving for special projects. Violet sewed tiny garments from fabric purchased in town, singing softly as she worked, old lullabies her mother had once sung to her. It was during her 7th month, as summer heat scorched the land, that the past finally caught up with them. Adam was repairing a section of fence on the far side of the property when he heard the sound of approaching horses. Visitors were rare, especially unannounced ones. Instantly alert, he mounted Thunder and rode quickly back toward the cabin. What he saw as he crested the small rise made his blood run cold. 3 men on horseback were in the yard, and one had dismounted and was approaching the cabin door. Even from a distance, Adam could tell they were strangers, not locals from Redemption Creek. He urged Thunder into a gallop, closing the distance rapidly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. As he drew nearer, he saw Violet step onto the porch, one hand resting on her prominent belly, the other hidden in the folds of her skirt where Adam knew she kept a small derringer. "That's far enough," he called out as he reached the yard, drawing the attention of all 3 men. He reined in Thunder and dismounted in one fluid motion, positioning himself between the strangers and the porch where Violet stood. "You Adam Stone?" asked the man who had dismounted, a tall, well-dressed individual with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I am," Adam confirmed, his stance wary, ready for trouble. "This is my ranch, state your business." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "My name is Victor Blackwood. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Adam felt rather than saw Violet stiffen behind him. The moment they had both feared had arrived. "Nothing here belongs to you," Adam replied evenly, though his heart was pounding. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood's smile widened, revealing perfect teeth. He was handsome in a conventional way, Adam noted dispassionately, the kind of man who would impress in polite society. But there was a cruelty in his eyes that confirmed everything Violet had told him. "My wife," Blackwood said, gesturing toward the porch. "Violet is my lawfully wedded wife, and I've come to take her home. Been searching for her for quite some time." "Ex-wife," Violet spoke up, her voice remarkably steady, "and I'm never going back with you, Victor. I'm married to Adam now, legally and properly." Blackwood's smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury that twisted his features. "You cannot be legally married to this rancher," he spat the word like an insult, "when you are still married to me. That makes you nothing but his whore." Adam's hand tightened on his gun, but he maintained his control, knowing that the situation could escalate dangerously with the other 2 men still mounted and armed. "I suggest you watch your language when speaking to my wife," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "And I suggest you leave our property immediately." Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Your property? This pathetic excuse for a ranch." His gaze moved past Adam to Violet, narrowing when he noticed her condition. "I see you wasted no time spreading your legs for him." Always were a slut beneath that proper exterior. Adam moved so quickly that Blackwood had no time to react. In an instant, the revolver was pressed against the man's temple, Adam's other hand gripping his expensive coat front. "One more word," Adam said, his voice deadly quiet, "and it will be your last." The other 2 men reached for their weapons, but froze when Violet's voice rang out. "I wouldn't," she warned, the derringer now visible in her steady hand. "I'm a very good shot these days." A tense silence fell over the yard, broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "Now," Adam said, still holding Blackwood at gunpoint, "here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to get back on your horses and ride away. You're going to forget you ever knew Violet, because if you come back here or try to cause trouble for my wife in any way, I will kill you. Do you understand?" Blackwood's eyes burned with hatred, but Adam saw something else there too, a calculating assessment, a recognition that he had underestimated the situation. "You're making a serious mistake," Blackwood said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I have connections, resources. I could make life very difficult for both of you." "You could try," Adam acknowledged. "But consider this, I was a lawman once. I still have friends in that profession. And I have a stack of letters Violet wrote, detailing every beating, every broken bone, every threat you ever made. Letters safely stored with a lawyer in Denver, to be opened if anything happens to either of us." It was a bluff, but a convincing one, judging by the flicker of uncertainty that crossed Blackwood's face. "Besides," Violet added from the porch, "how would it look to your business associates if it became known you couldn't control your own wife? That she chose a simple rancher over you? Your pride couldn't stand that kind of humiliation, could it, Victor?" Adam saw the hit land, saw Blackwood flinch at the prospect of public embarrassment. It was the right approach, appealing to the man's pride and social standing rather than any sense of decency he might possess. "She isn't worth the trouble," Blackwood finally said, straightening his coat as Adam released him and stepped back, gun still aimed. "Keep the damaged goods. I've already replaced her with a younger, more obedient model anyway." "Get off my land," Adam said, not rising to the bait. With a final venomous glare, Blackwood mounted his horse. "You're welcome to her," he said dismissively. "But don't be surprised when she runs from you too. It's what she does." The three men rode away, dust billowing behind them as they disappeared down the track toward town. Adam watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Violet, holstering his weapon. She was pale but composed, the derringer now lowered to her side. "Do you think he'll be back?" she asked quietly. Adam climbed the porch steps and took her in his arms, feeling a slight tremor running through her body despite her outward calm. "No," he said with more certainty than he felt. His type values appearance above all else. "You're right, he couldn't stand the public shame if word got out about how you left him, especially for someone he considers beneath him socially." Violet nodded against his chest, then pulled back to look up at him. "I'm sorry for bringing this to our doorstep." "Don't," Adam said firmly. "Don't apologize for his actions, never that." He placed a gentle hand on her belly, feeling the reassuring movement of their child within. "Are you all right, both of you?" "We're fine," Violet assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Just shaken." They went inside and Adam bolted the door, an unnecessary gesture perhaps, but one that made them both feel more secure. That night they held each other close, neither sleeping much, both processing the confrontation in their own way. "I was so afraid," Violet confessed in the darkness. "Not just for myself, but for you, for the baby. When I saw him standing there in our yard, it was like all the progress I've made these past months vanished in an instant." "But it didn't," Adam pointed out, stroking her hair soothingly. "You stood your ground, you faced him with courage." "Because I wasn't alone this time," she said. "Because I had you." Adam pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You'll never be alone again, Violet, I promise you that." As dawn broke, casting pale light through the cabin windows, they both finally drifted into exhausted sleep, the immediate danger past, the future still theirs to shape together. True to Adam's prediction, Victor Blackwood did not return. They learned from the telegraph operator in town that Blackwood and his men had taken the eastbound stage the very day of the confrontation, apparently deciding that Violet was indeed not worth the trouble of a prolonged fight. Life gradually returned to normal, the incident fading into the background as they focused on preparing for their child's arrival. The summer heat gave way to the cooler days of early fall, bringing relief to Violet in her final month of pregnancy. It was on a clear October morning, with the first hint of frost silvering the grass, that Violet's labor began. Adam rode into town like a man possessed, returning with the doctor just as her pains were intensifying. The birth was long and difficult, testing Violet's strength to its limits. Adam remained by her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement when her courage faltered. "I can't," she gasped at one point, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Adam, I can't do this." "You can," he assured her, his voice steady despite his fear. "You're the strongest person I know, Violet Stone. Our baby needs you to be strong just a little longer." As the sun was setting, casting the cabin in golden light, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Adam's eyes. The doctor cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing her in Violet's trembling arms. "She's perfect," Violet whispered, tracing a gentle finger over the baby's soft cheek. "Oh, Adam, look at her." Adam sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through him: joy, love, fierce protectiveness, and yes, grief too for the daughter he had lost. But this was a new beginning, a miracle he had never expected to experience again. "What shall we name her?" he asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. Violet looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. "I was thinking, Elizabeth Anna Stone, after your first daughter and wife, to honor them and the love you had for them, if that wouldn't be too painful for you." Adam was silent for a long moment, touched beyond words by Violet's generosity of spirit. "Elizabeth Anna," he repeated softly, testing the name. "It's beautiful, but are you sure?" Violet nodded. "They're part of you, Adam, part of what made you the man I love. I want our daughter to carry their names, to know their stories someday." Adam leaned down to kiss her gently, then pressed another kiss to his daughter's forehead. "Elizabeth Anna Stone," he agreed. "We'll call her Eliza for short." "Eliza," Violet echoed, smiling down at the now sleeping infant. "Our little Eliza." The doctor, who had been quietly packing his supplies, approached the bed. "She's a healthy one," he confirmed. "And you did well, Mrs. Stone, though you should rest as much as possible for the next few weeks." After the doctor had left, with Adam's profuse thanks and a generous payment, the new family settled into the quiet of the evening. Adam had moved the cradle next to the bed, but for now, Eliza remained in her mother's arms, both unwilling to break the connection just yet. "I never imagined this," Violet said softly as Adam sat beside them again. "When you found me that night, I was just trying to survive until morning. I had no hope beyond that, and now—" She looked down at their daughter, then back at Adam, her eyes shining with tears and love. "Now I have everything." Adam took her free hand, bringing it to his lips. "We both do," he agreed, "more than I ever thought possible." As night fell fully, wrapping the cabin in darkness relieved only by the gentle glow of the fire, Adam Stone looked at his wife and newborn daughter and felt a sense of completion, of rightness, that had eluded him for so long. The loneliness that had once been his constant companion was gone, replaced by the profound certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the people he was meant to love. Outside, the vast desert stretched beneath a canopy of stars, the same stars that had guided him on that fateful night when he had found a young woman digging through trash and carried her home in his arms. It had seemed like such a small act then, born of simple human decency. He could never have known it would lead to this, to love renewed, to family restored, to a future bright with promise. As Eliza stirred in Violet's arms, making the tiny mewling sounds of a newborn, Adam Stone silently gave thanks for second chances, for courage in the face of fear, and for the healing power of love freely given and gratefully received. In the years that followed, the Stone Ranch prospered, expanding gradually as Adam purchased adjacent land. The small cabin gave way to a proper house, built room by room as their family grew. Eliza was joined by two brothers, Samuel and Michael, and eventually by another sister, Hope. Violet became known throughout the area for her kindness and resilience, teaching at the small school in Redemption Creek 2 days a week once the children were old enough. Adam continued to work the ranch, but also accepted a position as deputy sheriff when the town grew large enough to need one, finding that helping maintain peace in their community brought a different kind of satisfaction than solitude ever had. They never saw Victor Blackwood again, though they heard through occasional gossip that he had remarried and moved further east, his interest in his former wife apparently truly extinguished. On warm summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, Adam and Violet would often sit on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and gold. Sometimes they would speak of the journey that had brought them together, marveling at the chain of circumstances that had led a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy to find in each other the healing they both so desperately needed. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into town that night?" Violet asked on one such evening, her head resting on Adam's shoulder, their hands intertwined as they had been for over a decade now. Adam considered the question, his gaze moving to where Eliza, now 12, was teaching her youngest sister to skip rope, her patience and gentleness a mirror of her mother's. "I try not to think about the paths not taken," he finally replied, "but I know I'm grateful every day that I found you." Violet squeezed his hand, understanding as always what remained unsaid between them, the acknowledgement that their love had been unlikely, unexpected, and all the more precious for it. "I'm grateful too," she said simply, "for the man who carried me home in his arms and helped me find my strength again." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Adam Stone pulled his wife closer, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter and the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. The journey from who they had been to who they had become together had not always been easy, but it had been true and right and necessary. And in the end, that was all that mattered, that two broken people had found wholeness in each other, that love had triumphed over fear, and that a chance encounter on a dusty street had led to a lifetime of joy neither had dared to imagine possible.